Good morning and welcome to the latest DREITEC webinar. Today we will be focusing on effective management strategies for multi-site internet connectivity. My name is Andrew Ord. I am a channel account manager here at DREITEC, and today I am joined by my colleague Joe Deasy, who is a technical account manager. And Joe will be focusing on the more technical aspects of this presentation. Right, so today we'll be focusing on several aspects of multi-site connectivity. This is designed primarily for our customers and reseller partners. I will be starting with more of a high-level overview, defining multi-site connectivity and strategic goals. We'll then be having a look at some of the DREITEC products for multi-site connectivity, and then having a look at the network management overview, which is Viger ACS. I will then hand over to my colleague Joe, who will outline some of the common multi-site challenges. He'll then review Viger ACS use cases, and we'll then be having a look at business continuity as well. Things to note before we begin, this is being recorded and will be available on the DREITEC.uk website. You will all receive a follow-up mail with instructions on where to find the webinar recording and the key points of contact for any follow-up. The Q&A will not be answered live. It will be followed up after the event via mail. However, at the end of this webinar, we will read out a few key questions that have come through, and we'll answer those live on the broadcast. And please do give us feedback at the end of the broadcast. There's a little survey to be completed. Right, so an overview. We kind of came up with this definition of probably what you would term an ideal kind of solution. So an effective multi-site connectivity solution is one that allows the easy transfer of voice and data. So a workforce across various sites can share data, documents, and applications quickly, seamlessly, and reliably. So that would be a kind of a very effective multi-site connectivity solution. Now, there are, of course, various solutions that can be implemented, things such as VPN, a virtual private network, which is giving you online privacy by creating a private network across a public internet connection. We obviously, a lot of people are using VPNs to work from home, etc. at the moment, so we should all be familiar with that. There are also things like MPLS, VPLS solutions, the multi-protocol label switching networks, which is essentially a private connection linking things like data centers and branch offices, typically offering or guaranteeing network performance and availability. And then SD-WAN is obviously a newer type of solution, software-defined networking, which separates the network control from the underlying hardware and makes this available as software that can be configured and deployed more easily across multiple sites. We aren't going to go deeply into solutions themselves. These are just examples of the types of things that we have seen in the market, and we'll move on to essentially what all of those are trying to achieve, the key factors when it comes to multi-site connectivity. Of course, reliability is incredibly important so that whoever is using the network can do exactly what they need to do whenever they need to do it. Speed is, of course, very important to make sure that the applications can run effectively and efficiently. We have this kind of constant battle for bandwidth in office environments, if you're working from home. So having effective strategies to manage this is incredibly important. Security is, of course, extremely important to protect the network against potential attacks. Line resilience, so things like failover, failing over from kind of, say, a fixed line solution to a 4G solution is of high importance to make sure that the network is always up and available. Flexibility. So this really refers to scaling up, future-proofing your business as more and more sites are added. And effective management. So effectively managing the network, being able to monitor your network centrally and know what's happening at any given time at the branches. You know, today in today's world, in the lockdown world that we now are kind of dealing with, it can be really difficult to actually get onto sites. So being able to manage from a central location is extremely important. So we're going to go on to some of the Draitec products that are typically used in multi-site connectivity solutions. Here we have a headquarters, or a head office, and these can be quite large, or they don't. It can be a smaller kind of head office, and the typical kind of devices that are used in headquarters are things like the Viger 3910. Some of you may be familiar. This is a high capacity router, really kind of enterprise solution with a firewall throughput of 10 gigs. It's also a VPN concentrator supporting 500 tunnels, and you can get up to 50 LAN subnets. So this is kind of the high end of our range. If you don't need something so high end, then the 2862 series is really our flagship series. An example here is the LAC, which is failover, which has 4G failover. It also supports 32 VPN tunnels. So all of our routers support VPN tunnels, and this has 8 LAN subnets. The Viger switch is an example of a high-end switch, the P2280X, which can be used. This is a 24-port switch. It's a high-speed 10 gig uplink switch with a 400-watt power budget. And if you wish to include Wi-Fi at your headquarters, and you have quite a number of staff working at the headquarters, the Viger AP1000 is our kind of top of the range high-end access point. It's tri-band connectivity, and you have the ability for 384 users to connect, and it's also mesh enabled. So if you go back to our headquarters, we now have the appropriate equipment and devices in the headquarters. So let's add a few remote sites. So these can be branch sites, these could be small offices or large offices, or they could be things like retail environments. Now, in the smaller environments, like say perhaps a retail environment or a smaller office, we don't need such high-end equipment necessarily. So devices like the Viger 2762N is very good. It's an ADSL, VDSL router with 300 meg throughput, and it also produces a single band Wi-Fi. Another example is the 2862AC. It's got a slightly higher throughput, supports 32 tunnels, but this has dual band Wi-Fi because it's an AC model. The Viger switch P1280, so this is another version of the 24 gig switch, not as high end as the 2280X, but still very effective in these types of environments. 24 ports, and then you also have, and the ports are gigabit ports, and then you also have 4 SFP ports as well. And then if you need to provide Wi-Fi at the kind of remote branches, something like the Viger 912C is very effective. It's a ceiling-mounted dual-band Wi-Fi access point. You can get up to 256 users, and it's mesh-enabled like all of our APs. Okay, so we now have the headquarters with some remote sites and remote branches, but as we know, a lot of people are working from home. So if we add some home users that are connected to the head office and the various branch sites. The home users, we have some excellent equipment and devices that are really good for home use. People who started working from home 6 months ago thought it would only last for maybe 3 weeks or 6 weeks and be using kind of the ISP routers. But now a lot of people have realized that working from home is going to be a long-term thing. And a lot of workers will be working from home permanently, which means they do require more business class solutions, but affordable business class solutions for their home work. So this is an excellent example of something that can be used in the home environment. This is a Viger 2620LN. It's a multi-WAN router. You can connect ADSL and VDSL. It also has a built-in modem. It's a dual SIM device, so you can put actually 2 SIM cards in there for 4G failover. And it also has VPN capability as well, 2 VPN tunnels. Another really nice device when it comes to working from home is the Viger AP802. So this is a small plug-in access point, very, very easy for people to use at home. They just plug it into their wall socket, and it will provide extended Wi-Fi coverage and range. It provides 4 SSIDs, and it's also mesh enabled. So if you wish to use a few of these around the home, and then you can actually set up a small mesh network. The Viger AP903 is a slightly higher model than the 802. It effectively will do a similar job, only you have more SSIDs and you also have 5 gigabit LAN ports. So we've provided equipment for hundreds and hundreds of different solutions, and we thought we would just take 2 recent solutions as case studies to highlight. The solutions can really range from small multi-site solutions to 2 or 3 or 4 sites, all the way up to hundreds or thousands of sites. So in this example, we were working with a large pizza chain. It was for 300 sites, and they put in the Viger 2862 LAC routers into these sites. The reason they wanted this specific model was because the LAC model provides failover, and 4G failover was really critical with this customer, because during peak hours, their peak hours were typically like a Friday afternoon going into the evening, and over the weekend. And if they went down at any point during that time, then the loss of revenue was significant. So they needed to make sure that the devices were always going to be working effectively. They also needed web content filtering to allow business critical sites for training and back-end systems. So essentially a whitelist to make sure that the staff were going on to kind of sites that they were not supposed to and could focus on the business critical applications. The quality of service was also very important, to make sure that the allocation of sufficient bandwidth was there for the critical applications. And then they also needed centralized control. So they used our management platform, which is ACS. So the whitelists were created, and provisioning and proactive IT support were also possible using the ACS across the 300 stores. Another case study that was really effective was a group of care homes, which was a Wi-Fi installation. There were 320 sites, and the equipment used was the Viger 2862 router, and as well as the Viger switch, which was the P1280. Now, this switch was a PoE switch. It provides power over Ethernet to the access points. So there were 3,800 access points used across these sites. They were the Viger AP910C. And which is a ceiling mounted device. So you can see a significant number of devices, probably around 5,000 devices in total across the routers, switches, and APs. And all of this was managed on ACS. Essentially, the Wi-Fi required was to have two SSIDs, two networks, one for the office staff so that they could manage the care homes effectively, and then also a guest network for the guest visiting the care homes. And as mentioned, ACS was used to set everything up. Now, the rules were rolled out essentially by one person. So everything that was done by one person, managed by one person, who managed to set this all up with the help of ACS. So it does show how effective central management can be. So you would have heard me mention ACS. Some of you will be familiar with this, and some of you may not have heard of it. ACS is our central management platform, where one can manage routers from switches and access points from a central point. So of course, one can manage routers from the router itself individually. But ultimately, when you have many sites, a multi-site network, that can be very time consuming. So it is good to have a central platform that can do that centrally and remotely. So as mentioned, you can manage the routers from a central, from the actual device itself. And this will enable you to manage the device, but it's more for kind of single sites, up to about 10 sites. We also have what's called Viger Connect, and this can manage up to 100 APs and switches at a single site, and this is a free software download. But when it comes to multi-site connectivity, ACS management is the ideal, and this is when you are kind of looking at kind of 100, 200 devices plus, and everything can be managed centrally, and it's a low cost per licensing. And Joe, my colleague, will be going into more detail in this. So this is an overview of ACS. It is a TR69 management protocol. And you can manage the devices as well as the actual, if you have things like 4G failover and the SIMs as well. The key benefits of Viger ACS is really about the visibility and control of your DRATEC estate. So you can monitor devices, check if they're online or offline, see what's happening on the WAN and the VPN disconnections. The router and client, local client WAN usage, so you can monitor exactly what's happening across the WAN usage and bandwidth, etc. You can do things like change management. So you can kind of, if customers need changing of IP addresses or things like that, you can do so. And then also device maintenance. So if you need to, device maintenance is things like scheduling firmware upgrades. For example, if you need to schedule a firmware upgrade overnight so that it doesn't interrupt the course of the business day, then you can do things like that using ACS. This is just a pick of the dashboard. As you can see, you have the various companies, or these could be various sites. You also have a map of the UK, so you'll be able to see exactly where the sites are, and you can see what's happening at those sites. If we go into a little bit more detail, we can then dig into each site and see which devices are currently being used at each site, which are up and which are down, online and offline. In this dashboard view, we get a much kind of more detailed picture of what is happening, and this is on the router itself. So we have a 2862 LAC router. As you can see, the ports that are highlighted in green are the ports that are currently active. So you know exactly what is happening on the router at that site, which ports are active, and what is happening across the WAN. You can also then see what is happening with the WAN usage across the entire network itself, as well as the actual devices themselves. Now, there are various forms of ACS. We have what's called ACS Cloud, which is for registered DRATEC resellers. And we have Cloud Premium. And this gives you a few more additional functions, such as managing an unlimited number of devices. You can do things like provisioning, reporting. We also have a self-hosted option. And again, this gives you a little bit more control. It's also an unlimited number of devices. And you can do some additional things like auto provisioning. So there is a range across the ACS platform in terms of the various types of ACS that are available. And with that, I am now going to hand it over to my colleague, Joe, who is going to do a little bit more of a deeper dive into the ACS platform and how that can be used to actually manage the multi-site connectivity.
Thank you, Andrew, and welcome everyone to this part of the webinar where we'll cover the multi-site challenges. What we are going to cover in this section of the presentation is scalable device management, device firmware, maintaining device configuration, provisioning network changes. So there are many key aspects about Viger ACS and how it can help managing your entire DRATEC estate. Andrew has touched upon some of the key features and key benefits today. But for this multi-site webinar, these are some key areas I think can help greatly in managing your multi-site deployment. So first of all, let's look at the scalable device management. There are a number of methods that DRATEC provide for managing your devices, and we'll just go over some of these details just to see the difference between them, and you can best choose what's available for your needs. So first of all, we'll actually look at some single site management. What's actually available in the DRATEC management offering. So we have Router Central Management and Viger Connect. So with the Router Central Management, essentially the DRATEC routers, along with the firmware on the device, will offer some management of either the Viger switches or the Viger access points. Now, this will differ depending on the model, so do check the specification pages for each DRATEC router, and that will clearly identify the number of access points that can be managed and the number of switches that can be managed from behind this router. But effectively, what this allows you to do is you can have the router at the remote site, and from the interface of the router itself, you have visibility of the network switch and visibility of the network access points. So there's no need to do any additional open ports or creating a VPN to the site to be able to get to the local IP addresses of those devices. So management of these additional network devices does become a lot easier from the router itself. And just to highlight some of those key features of the management that the router provides, if we look at the Viger switch management offering, you get a nice display in the interface of the actual switches that are actually attached to the network. The router will automatically discover those, and we can see on the image in the screen that connected to port 2 of the router, there was a switch connected. We can see the IP address of that switch and also the number of ports available and which ports are actually in use. So the ones with the green circle there are actually in use on this switch, and we have the indicator in the middle there, the green circle with the uplink arrow, that's the uplink port to the router from the switch. And you get some good details from this interface here, so we can see the status, but also we can see information about the firmware and some really key features and great features that help with the management of the switches. You can actually push out some VLAN configuration from the router to the switch as well. So it makes VLAN setup on the Viger switches a lot easier, especially remotely as well. Remote diagnostics for the switch ports are also offered. as well as being able to remotely try and identify where a specific device is connected. There's a search facility where you can search via an IP address or a MAC address, and you'll get the feedback of which port is actually used for that device. Logging can also be created and alerting for any port connection or disconnections. And we can obviously maintain the switch as well, whether it be a configuration restore or doing a reboot on the switch. That can all be done from the central management of the router. Additionally, we have AP management that we can provide, and the router will again auto detect any of the access points connected to the network. We have full visibility of the uptime of those devices, what firmware is running on those devices, and a number of clients also connected to the SSIDs that are being broadcast by the APs. Other key features that we can have are the fact that we can build wireless profiles on the router and push those wireless profiles out to all of the access points. So you never actually need to log into the access points themselves. You just build the profile on the router and push out those profiles to the access points. And obviously maintenance, again, is a nice management option if you're just doing the single site management, doing firmware upgrades and configuration restores. We move on then to Viger Connect. So if that's the kind of solution that you potentially need, but the spec of the device has a limit to the number of access points or switches that you want to manage, then Viger Connect is something that can help here, because this is effectively another controller that's sitting on the network, but this time it's a piece of software that is installed on a local Windows machine. It's a free piece of software available from the Dratec website, and effectively this does the same job of discovering the switches and access points, but in this case you can manage up to 100 devices, and again you have full control of the management of those devices all from that central location. So this is quite a nice solution for if you need to expand the wireless density of a site and you need the increased number of access points. Then we move on to Viger ACS itself. So Viger ACS takes it up a level in the fact that now we can offer multi-site management using Viger ACS. So this central management solution, remote sites, no matter where the location is, the devices all register back to the central server, and you have full visibility and control of that entire Dratec estate. So we'll now move on to the device firmware challenge for multi-site. If you currently have a estate of devices that you are managing remotely at the moment, are you aware currently of the firmware version that is being used on all of the remote devices? Firmware obviously is important to keep updated on the devices and make sure you're using the latest releases so you can benefit from what is brought in the firmware release. Maintaining these firmware versions also can be quite difficult as your multi-site deployments expand, they scale up, there's more devices to keep on top of in making sure that they have the right firmware, and also doing these firmware upgrades out of hours to avoid any disruption to those remote sites. That also adds another challenge in the fact that you've got a smaller window of time now to keep these devices all maintained on the correct firmware. So why is it you want to do a firmware upgrade? Dratec actually regularly provide firmware upgrades for current models and also models that have actually been end of life. If there is a requirement for a security patch, then those devices will actually get upgrades as well. The firmware upgrades are not associated to any license. There's no cost for these firmware upgrades, and these firmware upgrades will include new features, improvements to existing features, and if required, any security patch as well. So definitely important to keep firmware upgraded on remote sites. So how can we use ACS to help with this kind of like multi-site challenge of keeping all the devices upgraded to the latest firmware? Well, first of all, we can use the ACS reports. The built-in reports can really help here to identify the current situation with what firmware is on all the devices at all the remote sites that you have. So this report here is a report run on the top level network. We've just got an example network here of only 12 devices in this registered ACS server. And we can run a report on that whole network there, or we can do it customer specific. We can select different networks as well. Running that report will give an output of what the current firmware version is on every site, and that gives you then an indication of where you are with your network and management of those devices, if any of them do need to be upgraded. So once we've identified the current status of the network, we can now use ACS to help plan firmware upgrades on devices, and we can do this in a couple of ways. We can do it at the device level, so we have a maintenance firmware upgrade option here, and we can build a task for the firmware upgrade, and we can schedule this out of hours. So essentially we're building a profile here, and the firmware upgrade itself will be automated at a later time, where the site is not going to be affected by the device getting upgraded and the reboot that will be applied. Once you build that task, you can select single or multiple devices that the firmware upgrade gets applied to. And if you've got quite a large number of devices in this network and maybe different models in this network as well, we have a filter option which can allow you to easily locate a device or list a specific model and apply the firmware upgrade to those devices only. Another way of doing this is actually doing it at the network level. So we can actually have a firmware upgrade applied to all the devices in a specific network. And this can be very useful, especially when you've got a larger estate as well of devices that you need to manage. There are two upgrade types that we can apply. The first upgrade type, just to mention, is the current upgrade type. And essentially this provides a very controlled method of firmware upgrades, so you can choose your upgrade path, which firmware version you want to go from and to, and the firmware upgrade will only be applied to the devices that match the current version that you specify, and will apply the firmware version that you selected. Again, the scheduling option is available for this network level firmware upgrade option. The other option for the upgrade type is the target, and this allows us now to specify the firmware that we want on all of our devices that we selected. We've got a specification here of the model being all our FIGA 2862 series, any of the model variants with their asterisks there, and we want all of our 2862s here to be on the 3941 firmware. So we may have previously used the current method to actually make sure that all our estate is actually now on the latest firmware. If Tratec were to release a new version, this is a way that you can easily update this firmware upgrade job task here and put in the new version of firmware that you want to have on all the units. As the devices poll into the server, ACS knows what firmware version they're currently on, and it can easily upgrade those devices for you. The next challenge that we're going to move on to now is maintaining device configuration. Now, with installing devices to customer sites, these typically will have a specific configuration in place that meets the requirements of the customer. Over the life cycle of that device at the remote site, there's potentially a number of people that will be logging into that device, whether it be the customer themselves, an engineer that's gone to site, reported issue or resolving issues, and they might log in and check the configuration. And also you've got the support desk, potentially a remote support desk offering access to the router to make changes for the customer. So over this period of time, the configuration, the original requested configuration is is it still in place, or has there been any changes that's going to put the site at risk? So we're talking here about any potential firewall changes, or any open ports that have been applied, or any additional services that have been enabled on the router that you might not particularly want to have enabled for the site itself. So how can ACS help? Well, just a quick word on the configuration of the devices. All the routers, the switches, and the access points all have different features and different configuration options within them. So there'll be different fields, there'll be different tick boxes that can be selected, and for every feature in a router, switch, and an access point, essentially the configuration option has a mapped TR069 parameter associated to it. So for Viger ACS to communicate and make changes to the device, this is the TR069 parameter that it would use for the associated feature. On the screen here, we've got SSH, so for secure shell, remote access via command line there to this router. This is something that can be enabled or disabled, and below there is the associated parameter. Now, a really nice feature is that Viger ACS can actually retrieve the current value of any of these parameters that are on the devices. And we are going to use this method now to run a report. So again, we're using the report features of ACS, and we're using a device configuration report here. And what we can specify is the parameters that we're interested in. Whether it be I've got a list here of the router name on the left-hand side here. We've got the DNS servers, is the firewall enabled, and what's the ports being used, or is the HTTP server or HTTPS server enabled or disabled on these devices. So once we've specified our parameters, we can select the devices or the networks that we want to actually run the report on. And the feedback that you will get from Viger ACS is once ACS has communicated to the devices and requested the current value, a report is generated. So there was 3 devices in this report that we created, and it's separated by these 2 red lines here. And we can see the parameters, and on the right-hand side, the result. And this is really powerful because you now have a clear indication of what the current configuration is on every device. This is a really powerful way of actually getting that visibility of your estate. A couple of things that we can highlight on this report is this here is the firewall on the router. We can actually see that the firewall has actually been disabled on this specific device. For whatever reason that might be, there might be some troubleshooting exercises that was done at site. Maybe someone's disabled the firewall to see if that's affected any of the routing issues that they were having, and maybe they didn't remember to re-enable the feature. And another option that we want to highlight here is the HTTP server here. This is currently enabled on the device for remote management. Perhaps we only want to allow the secure method of managing these devices via HTTPS. So the fact that that is currently enabled, we don't want people to be accessing the router via HTTP potentially. So once we have this information to hand, we can look at actually making the changes. And we can make these changes from ACS itself. We can do the configuration changes here for the firewall on a device itself. This is like being on the router. We can make sure we enable the data filter there for the router. That's one way of doing it. Or we can actually build a global parameter profile. What these are really useful for is actually you can build the kind of configuration that you want to change. So in this instance, again, the firewall data filter here that we will create this job. And once we've created that, we can actually apply that to a single device, or because ACS is only updating one part of the configuration, it's not resending a whole configuration, we could actually send that profile to the whole network. So if you had an example of that report there only showed one firewall rule was disabled on one device. If you had multiple devices that had that same issue, or if you just wanted to make sure that all the devices actually had the firewall enabled, you could actually apply that profile to the network itself, and ACS would apply it to every single device in that network. To take this a step further, we can actually use ACS to ensure that devices always have the correct configuration in place. And this allows us to actually specify the value that we want, and ACS will detect if that configuration is ever changed. So we'll stick with that firewall example here, going back to that profile that we previously created for the global parameter. And highlighted, you can see there is a keep setting. So we can actually set keep for that specific parameter. And what that will now do is, first of all, it will apply the profile and update the data filter to be enabled if it wasn't already. And in the future, if anyone was to disable that firewall, the next time the device pulls into the ACS server, ACS will detect that change and understand that that value should always be enabled and restore that value to the unit. So it's quite again, another powerful feature that ACS can provide in managing and maintaining the configuration across all the sites. Want to move on to now to provisioning network changes, and this is more of a enhanced provisioning option because we now can do some site-specific network changes as well. So the example that I normally give here is the fact that an ISP WAN migration requiring new WAN connection details, every site will need their own unique username and password for that new WAN configuration. And we can also use a nice feature on the Viga router here for the WAN fallback feature as well. So just to highlight that feature, we've got the internet access here on the router for the current ISP, username and password displayed. And there's also a fallback account that can also be used. And the way that this effectively works is that when this device is currently using the current ISP details, in the future, if there's any planned migration that's taking place, the router's already pre-configured with those new details. So there's no need for someone to be at site and swap out the router with another one that's got another lot of configuration on it, or for a different config to be restored on this router we have now. There's essentially very minimal downtime for the end customer, because when the router detects that it cannot connect using the original current ISP details, the router will automatically try and use the new fallback account as well. And once the switch has taken place, the device can come back online. This can be done from ACS, and we can specify certain configuration for each site using CPE parameters. So this is a really useful way for actually specifying unique configuration to each site. I want to finish up now with the another case study discussion here on a more of a larger rollout that we actually did using ACS. So we do have support for auto provisioning on the devices, the Draytec devices, and using Viga ACS. So if this is something that potentially you are interested in, if you ever deal with a large rollout, do contact us about the auto provisioning that ACS can provide, because this can really help that deployment. An example of this case study was that they needed to do a product refresh across 1,500 different connections, and they had timescales to meet for completing that rollout, and they wanted to actually manage those devices centrally after as well. So do get in contact if that is of interest. I'm now going to pass over to Andrew, who's now going to continue the presentation with the business continuity section. So Andrew, you should now be able to continue with that. Thank you very much.
Thanks very much, Joe. So the final thing we're going to touch on briefly is business continuity and how Draytec can assist in that regard. So ultimately what we're trying to avoid is the dreaded downtime, which of course decreases the productivity, potential loss of revenue. When I spoke earlier about the pizza chain, if you go down at critical times, that can really result in a significant loss of revenue. It also has a real negative effect on the digital transformation. And it's a matter of if, but not not if, but when. We know that the ISPs have struggled at times to maintain their networks during this lockdown period, and we have a number of customers who have experienced this and required some kind of line resilience to fall back on. And ultimately, it can affect your business reputation. There's nothing worse than a customer calling a business, possibly being on hold for 5 minutes, 10 minutes, and then as soon as they get through, someone says, oh, sorry, we're offline. So obviously, we need to avoid that wherever possible. DRAITEC has a really great failover option. All of our routers have 4G capability. Some of them towards the entry level, it's purely just a dongle option. And then we have the devices where you can actually insert a SIM card. So here we go, we would insert the SIM card into this router. We have the connection, the fixed line connection WAN to the internet. But say the line goes down, we will receive an alert from ACS letting us know that. And the 4G kicks in automatically over LTE, the LTE connection, so that the network can run smoothly. And then as soon as the line is back up, then we are back to normal. As you can see in the top left-hand side, that is an example of a router that has a built-in SIM card slot. We have a range of LTE built-in SIM card slot models now. So anything that you see the L suffix, so for example, 2862 LN, etc. We have devices with multiple SIM slots, and they are not locked to one provider. So you can use any SIM provider to have that 4G failover. We also have dual SIM, so 2 SIM slots, as you can see in the top right-hand side of that slide. So models like the 2620LN or the Viger 2927 LAC are dual SIM. Now that's essentially having 3 networks. You have your fixed line network as well as 2 separate and different SIM providers. So that builds a lot of resilience, because it's very unlikely that all 3 networks are going to be down at the same time. There will always be one of those networks will be up. So that is an extremely effective solution for building that kind of line resilience. So in summary, we've covered a lot of things in this webinar. There are a lot of strategic objectives that we are all looking to achieve with multi-site connectivity. And we need to plan for the common challenges across all of the sites, and then potentially use the management tools to make sure that we solve those challenges. DRAITEC has a range of solutions and products that can really help in this regard, particularly the L models, the LTE models. And ultimately, we've also got the network control, the ability for management across ACS to deal with things like firmware configuration, provisioning, etc. And then business continuity is really important, and we have some really good solutions and products there. Some additional resources. So all of the upcoming webinars are published on our website, the draitec.co.uk website, as well as the webinars that have already taken place. You can have a look at those. We have our sales and pre-sales contacts on the website as well, and our technical support. And then if you wish to have a one-to-one meeting or training with regards to Viger ACS, then we're able to do so, and please reach out. So we are now going to move on to a brief Q&A session. So Joe is going to read out some questions that have come through during the course of this webinar, and he will answer those to finish off the webinar. Thank you, Joe.
Okay, so some good questions that have come through during the course of this webinar. So And we'll go through each of these. First question is there a way to have routers connect to an ACS server out of the box? So very quick question there. So the routers themselves, routers, switches, and the access points, that they all need to have an element of configuration in place to actually specify where the server is and which network they actually are going to register it into. So there is a couple of ways that is possible. There is actually a option with DHCP. So DHCP options 43 allows you to actually specify the TR069 configuration that's going to be used on those devices. But also there is the potential option, this is often used for kind of like the auto provisioning features that I did highlight that ACS support. So if that is something that you are looking to achieve, the auto provisioning solution where the device is out of the box and plugged in and registers to an ACS, then do make contact with us and we can discuss the different options that are available for that. But there is possibility of that. Another question that we have here is, can we use Viger Connect to manage multiple sites or manage more than 100 devices? Okay, so Viger Connect was the free software that you can get from Dratek's download page, and the Viger Connect gives you management of Dratek switches and Dratek access points. It is limited to 100 devices when using Viger Connect, and it is designed for a single site management. So the software being on an actual Windows machine, that Windows machine can discover any of the switches or access points on the same network as itself, essentially. So that is designed to say for a single site management. If you do want multiple sites, and if you want more than 100 devices, that's when we need to look at the Viger ACS platform. Another question we have here is on, can we see details on individual users in Viger ACS, such as data usage or sites accessed? Okay, so in terms of monitoring bandwidth usage, Viger ACS does this on a number of different levels. So the routers report back overall WAN bandwidth usage, and there was a screen in Andrew's slides there which showed the kind of overall network usage. So you might have 100 sites potentially in a network, and you can see the overall bandwidth usage for that entire network. And then you can break it down per individual site. So each individual site will be utilizing a certain amount of bandwidth themselves. That can be displayed. We can then go one level down and actually see per WAN interface. You might have a Viger 2862 with a primary VDSL connection potentially and another 4G connection as well on that site doing load balancing. ACS can display the bandwidth per WAN interface. Then we can move on to the actual client usage. ACS does get information from the remote router about the amount of traffic per client. So you can go into the monitoring menu and view the clients menu that's displayed, and that will display there per client the total amount of bandwidth usage. Now what traffic is actually being sent across by those clients is not displayed in Viger ACS2, but this is actually something that will be coming along in a future version of ACS. You will be actually able to see the actual applications used by those clients as well. So that will be a nice feature that will be coming along shortly. Another question we have is, can we see details in individual users in Viger ACS? So, sorry, that's that question. Does switch management and AP management integrate with Viger ACS so that basic switches like the Viger switch G1080 can be managed? So ACS can manage all the routers, and we've got ACS managed switches and access points. For any switches like the G1080, this specific model does not have the configuration to go directly into an ACS server, but the G1080, a nice small form factor 8-port switch, that can still be managed by Viger ACS as long as you have the Dratec router in front of it. ACS can still manage that switch via the Dratec router, so you still got access to all the Dratec devices from Viger ACS essentially. And the last question that I have here is, if you connect routers or APs to Viger ACS, can you still manage the devices through their web interface? So yes, the devices themselves will always be able to respond on their local management interfaces. So the router switches and the access points there. The additional TR069 configuration that you add in there is an additional method for managing those devices via the Viger ACS. So they can be used in conjunction. You can use Viger ACS to manage your entire estate, do all your firmware upgrades, have the monitoring of the bandwidth usage and any devices that go offline. But at the same time, if you still want to have that direct connection to those devices, that is still possible. So that's the summary of some of the questions that have come through today, and that brings us to the end of the Q&A.
Right, thanks very much, Joe. And that brings us to the end of this webinar. We hope it has been informative for everyone. Please remember to keep an eye open for future webinars and upcoming webinars. And with that, we would like to wish everyone well for the rest of the week. Bye for now.